Look around you. This is what we see when we think of war. Cities turned to rubble, bridges collapsed, homes hollowed out into empty shells. The immediate devastation is staggering, a visceral punch to our collective gut. We see the smoke rising from a fresh battlefield, and we think this is the cost. The fighting has stopped, the treaties are signed, and we believe the price has been paid. But what if I told you that all of this destruction is just the down payment, the first installment on a debt that will be paid for generations? The real bill for war arrives long after the last shot is fired, and its terms are far more brutal than any of us can imagine. Today, we're going to pull back the curtain on the visible destruction and explore the hidden, enduring costs of conflict, the true price of war. When the dust settles, the first and most obvious challenge is rebuilding. But this isn't just about bricks and mortar. It's about rebuilding an entire economy from the ground up. Before the conflict, there was a functioning system. Factories produced goods, shops sold them, people had jobs, and money flowed. War is a wrecking ball to this intricate machine. Production facilities are destroyed, supply chains are severed, and international investment flees in the face of instability. Suddenly, the country is no longer a producer, but a consumer, heavily reliant on foreign aid just to survive. The currency can collapse, savings can be wiped out, and a nation that was once self-sufficient can find itself in a cycle of debt and dependency that can last for decades. Think about the human cost of this economic collapse. The millions of people who once had careers, skills, and a sense of purpose are now unemployed. A farmer can't farm when his fields are littered with unexploded mines. A teacher can't teach when her school is a pile of rubble. A doctor can't heal when the hospital has no medicine. The unemployment rate skyrockets, not just for a few years, but potentially for an entire generation. This creates a desperate population, a breeding ground for poverty and crime. The struggle to find a loaf of bread or clean water becomes the new reality. The economic engine of the country has not just stalled. It has been fundamentally broken, and jump-starting it requires a monumental effort that can take half a century or more. The cost isn't just in the billions of dollars needed to rebuild infrastructure. It's in the lost potential, the stolen futures, and the crushing weight of poverty that settles over the land like a permanent shadow. Beyond the economic devastation, war rips apart the very fabric of society. Communities that have existed for centuries are scattered to the winds. When the bombs start falling, people don't just lose their homes. They lose their neighbors, their social networks, their sense of belonging. They become displaced, either within their own country or as refugees fleeing across borders. We've all seen the images, long lines of people carrying everything they own, moving towards an uncertain future. Each person in that line is a story of disruption. A child forced to leave their school, their friends, their entire world behind. An elderly person separated from the community that supported them. Families torn apart, sometimes forever. The refugee camps that spring up become cities of despair. They are meant to be temporary, but for many, they become a permanent home. Life is put on hold. Education, a cornerstone of any thriving society, is one of the first casualties. Schools are closed, repurposed, or destroyed. An entire generation can grow up without learning to read or write, creating a massive skills gap that will cripple the nation's recovery for years to come. The social connections, the traditions, the shared cultural life that bind people together, all of it is fractured. When a community is atomized like this, it's incredibly difficult to put back together. People lose trust in each other, in institutions, and in the future. This social breakdown is a deep, festering wound that can be even harder to heal than the physical destruction. It leaves a legacy of fragmentation and mistrust that haunts a society long after peace is declared. Now let's talk about the wounds we cannot see. The psychological trauma of war is perhaps its most insidious and long-lasting legacy. For a soldier on the front lines, the experience of combat is a constant assault on the mind. The fear, the loss, the moral compromises, these things don't just disappear when they return home. They manifest as post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. It's a storm of nightmares, flashbacks, anxiety, and emotional numbness that can make it impossible to reconnect with family, hold a job, or find any sense of normalcy. They may have survived the war, but the war continues to rage inside their minds every single day. The battle for their mental health becomes a solitary, lifelong struggle, fought far from any battlefield. But this trauma is not limited to soldiers. Imagine being a civilian, a child, living under the constant threat of violence. The sound of air raid sirens, the sight of destruction, the loss of loved ones. These experiences carve deep scars into the psyche. Children who grow up in war zones can suffer from extreme anxiety, depression, and developmental issues. Their sense of safety is shattered, and they learn to see the world as a dangerous and unpredictable place. This trauma doesn't just affect them, it gets passed down. It's called generational trauma. Parents who are struggling with their own psychological wounds may find it difficult to provide a stable, nurturing environment for their children. The children, in turn, grow up carrying that burden and may pass it on to their own kids. This creates a cycle of pain and suffering that echoes through families for generations. The invisible wounds of war are a poison that contaminates the soul of a nation, affecting how people love, work, and live for decades to come. As if the human and economic costs weren't enough, war wages a silent, brutal campaign against the environment. Modern warfare is an ecological catastrophe. Battlefields are contaminated with heavy metals, chemicals, and the depleted uranium from munitions. These toxins seep into the soil and groundwater, poisoning the land and water sources for centuries. Forests are burned to the ground, not just by accident, but as a deliberate tactic to clear lines of sight or deny cover to the enemy. This widespread deforestation leads to soil erosion, loss of biodiversity, and disrupts entire ecosystems. The delicate balance of nature is thrown into chaos. Animals lose their habitats, and species are pushed to the brink of extinction. The very land that is supposed to sustain the population becomes a toxic, barren wasteland. Cleaning up this environmental mess is a monumental and often impossible task. The contamination can be so severe that large areas of land become permanently uninhabitable, a constant physical reminder of the conflict. The war may be over, but the earth itself continues to suffer, bearing the scars for millennia. Finally, the political vacuum created by war is a perfect breeding ground for new and even more dangerous threats. When a government collapses or is severely weakened, a power vacuum emerges. The rule of law disappears and chaos reigns. This instability creates an opportunity for extremist groups to rise. They prey on the desperate and disillusioned population, offering a sense of order, purpose, and identity where there is none. They exploit the grievances and anger of a people who feel abandoned and betrayed. These groups can quickly gain power, seizing control of territory and resources, and imposing their own brutal ideology. The conflict may have officially ended, but it transforms into a new, more asymmetrical form of violence. The nation can become a failed state, a hub for terrorism and regional instability that threatens not just its own people, but the entire world. The political instability that follows a war can be more deadly and difficult to resolve than the original conflict itself. It's a vicious cycle where violence begets more violence, and peace remains a distant, unattainable dream. So when we look at the images of a war-torn city, let's remember what we're really seeing. We are not just looking at the end of a conflict. We are looking at the beginning of a long and painful aftermath. The true cost of war isn't measured in the number of bombs dropped or buildings destroyed. It's measured in the generations of economic hardship, the shattered communities, the minds haunted by trauma, the poisoned earth, and the endless cycles of political instability. The price is paid by the child who can't go to school, by the soldier who can't escape his nightmares, by the farmer whose land will not grow food, and by the countless people who will be born into a world shaped by a conflict they never knew. The fighting may stop, but the war, in its truest sense, goes on. It's a debt passed from one generation to the next, a heavy burden carried long after the world has moved on and forgotten. This is the real cost, the enduring legacy of war. Thank you for watching. If this video gave you a new perspective, please consider liking it and subscribing to our channel for more deep dives into the topics that shape our world. Stay curious, stay informed.